The Atlantic Ocean in the spring of 1943 carried no scent of victory. On the deck of the Liberty ship Robert E. Lee, the salty wind blew through strands of barbed wire. Below the steel grates, 300 German prisoners from Rommel's Afrika Korps sat in silence, uniforms torn, eyes sunken, boots still stained with Tunisian sand. They believed they were being sent to a place worse than prison. But as the ship cut through the fog, the eastern seaboard of the United States emerged. Cranes, factories, and harbors blazing with electric light. A young sergeant whispered, "If this is the weak America our propaganda spoke of, then we never had a chance." No one replied. Only the deep rumble of the Liberty's engines echoed across the cold sea. The first notes of the greatest cultural shock the German army would ever experience. A journey had begun, one that would strip away pride, destroy illusions, and reveal the true power of a democracy built on industry and humanity. May 15, 1943. The Liberty ship Robert E. Lee docked at Newport News, Virginia. For the men inside, it was the first breath of air untainted by dust and diesel since the collapse of Tunisia. They stepped onto American soil, not as conquerors, not even as soldiers anymore, but as evidence of a failed empire. Private Klaus Hartmann, 22 years old, pressed his face against the ship's railing. He had fought across half of North Africa, watched his Panzer regiment reduced from 128 tanks to 11 scorched hulks. Now, as cranes groaned above and loudspeakers called commands in English, he realized something unsettling. Everything here moved faster, smoother, stronger. When guards led the prisoners to the mess hall, the first surprise was not cruelty, but abundance. Thick beef stew, white bread with real butter, coffee that smelled like life. Some of them could not finish their plates. Their bodies weren't ready for generosity. Hartmann wrote secretly that night, "We are being fed like kings." Yesterday, they served roast chicken with potatoes. Hans from Hamburg wept when he saw meat. For men raised on Nazi propaganda that called Americans weak, decadent, and lazy, this was more than a meal. It was a revelation. They realized that hunger existed only where lies were fed. From the docks, trains awaited, not cattle cars, but Pullman passenger coaches, cushioned seats, curtains, windows that opened. No one shouted, no one cursed. As the train pulled inland toward Arkansas, the prisoners saw a landscape that contradicted every lecture they'd ever heard. Modern tractors in endless fields, silos like steel cathedrals, highways crowded with cars. Cars owned not by party officials, but by ordinary people. Hartmann wrote, "Every worker owns a car. Even Negroes drive better automobiles than German officers." Each mile of rail tore another piece from the illusion of Nazi superiority. Outside Detroit, the train slowed near a massive complex, Willow Run. From its endless roof, columns of smoke and light climbed into the sky. An American guard said casually, "That's where we make the B-24 bombers, one every 63 minutes. The Germans laughed and then fell silent. They knew the truth. Germany had no factory that could rival this. Henry Ford's mile-long plant produced bombers faster than the Luftwaffe could replace losses. Every machine, every worker, every spark of electricity testified to a simple fact. America wasn't improvising. It was manufacturing victory. On May 20th, 1943, the prisoners reached Camp Chaffee, Arkansas. Rows of wooden barracks stretched across the plains, neat, clean, electrified. Inside, mattresses, working heaters, running water. The commandant, Colonel William Patterson, addressed them calmly through a German-speaking interpreter. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, and you will be paid. Officers are exempt. Enlisted men will assist with local farms and repairs. No threats, no shouting, just efficiency and order." Hartmann was stunned. Even as a prisoner, he felt more respected than he had ever been by his own officers. Hartmann's work detail went to the Morrison farm, 120 acres of cotton, corn, and wheat. Henry Morrison, 60 years old, had lost a son at Normandy and did not hide his resentment. But labor was scarce and the War Department paid for help. On the first morning, Morrison's wife served them breakfast: eggs, bacon, biscuits, milk, coffee. When she saw their disbelief, she said, "You boys must be wondering why we feed you so good. Truth is, We got more food than we know what to do with. For men from a starving Europe, her words hit like artillery. In Germany, rations barely reached 1,400 calories. Here, even a farmer's apology carried the weight of abundance. The farm had 4 John Deere tractors, each more advanced than anything in Europe. Hartmann marveled at the hydraulic lifts, the power takeoffs, the clean hum of modern engineering. Morrison said proudly, "Last year, Deere made 75,000 of these, even while building tank transmissions." Hartmann stared at the green machines under the Arkansas sun. "One tractor here does the work of 20 horses," he wrote, "and they have 4. He realized that Germany hadn't lost the war yet, but it had already lost the economy of the future. Evenings at Camp Chaffee were quiet. The men could buy cigarettes, chocolate, and Coca-Cola from the canteen using camp currency. It was absurd. German soldiers, once conquerors, now purchasing American sweets as prisoners. Sergeant Miller, a Stalingrad survivor, became the camp economist. "Do you realize," he told Hartmann, "that our daily pay here buys more food than a German worker's monthly wage?" The numbers spoke louder than propaganda. A nation capable of paying its enemies better than Germany could feed its citizens was a nation that had already outproduced destiny itself. One week, their work shifted to road repair. There, they met the Caterpillar D7, a diesel monster moving tons of earth with a single operator. Corporal Schneider, a former construction engineer, said quietly, "In Germany, it would take 10 men with shovels to do what one American machine does in an hour." The Caterpillar didn't symbolize technology. It symbolized a philosophy, progress without fear, production without ideology. Every day, freight trains thundered past the camp, flat cars of tanks, gondolas filled with coal, boxcars stacked with ammunition. The rhythm was constant, unstoppable. Even at night, the sky glowed orange from the Bethlehem steel plant in Birmingham, producing more metal in a week than Germany in a month. The prisoners began to understand what their generals never had. This war was never about courage. It was about capacity. By the winter of 1943, Camp Chaffee was heated to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Every barrack had a furnace burning coal shipped from Pennsylvania. For men from bombed-out cities freezing in their sleep, it felt surreal. Hartmann wrote, "We are warmer as prisoners than our families at home." The thought haunted him. It wasn't just defeat, it was moral inversion. The enemy showing more humanity than one's own homeland. On Christmas Eve, the Red Cross and local churches sent gifts to the camp. Cigarettes, coffee, socks, and handmade scarves. Hartmann received one knitted by a woman in Little Rock. Her note read, in broken German, "I hope you go home soon. May God keep you safe." He learned that her son was a pilot fighting over the Pacific. She had knitted a scarf for a German prisoner, while her own child fought his war. "What kind of nation," Hartmann wrote, "has so much faith it can show kindness to its enemies?" By spring 1944, news from Europe confirmed what their eyes already knew. Germany was collapsing under the weight of its own illusion. The D-Day landings, the fall of Rome, the Allied bombers darkening the sky. Every headline matched the lesson they had learned in Arkansas fields and American factories. Power belonged to those who could build, not those who could believe. In his diary, Hartmann wrote a single line that summed up the transformation. "We were not defeated by American soldiers. We were defeated by American factories." And somewhere, far beyond the fences of Camp Chaffee, the hum of machinery and the soft laughter of ordinary citizens kept reminding them. The strength of democracy was not in its weapons, but in its ability to feed both its soldiers and its enemies. The first sound the German prisoners heard when their ship docked in Virginia wasn't shouting or gunfire. It was the sound of metal striking metal, a steady mechanical rhythm that filled the air like music. Newport News Harbor moved with the precision of a clock, cranes turning, hammers echoing, whistles calling men to work. From the railings, Hartmann and the others looked down. Below them stood an army of civilians, men, women, and even African Americans, all working side by side. No officers screaming orders, no fear, only movement, the war machine of a free nation. "They work as if their machines have soul," Schneider murmured. For the first time, the prisoners understood. This wasn't chaos. It was organized freedom. When the cargo doors opened, the smell of oil and fresh paint filled the air. Above them towered cranes taller than cathedrals. Everywhere engines roared, sparks flew, and the glow of welding torches turned the docks into daylight. Hartmann could hardly write fast enough. They have enough ships to carry their armies, enough steel to build bridges, and enough fuel to do both at once. In Germany, we must choose one. The docks of Newport News weren't just infrastructure. They were proof of limitless capacity. After processing, the prisoners boarded trains heading west. Each man received a boxed meal, a clean towel, and bottled water. There was no shouting, no blows, no humiliation, only procedure. As the train moved inland, they looked through the windows. Night fell, but the land didn't darken. Towns glowed like constellations, factories lit, gas stations open, billboards shining in the dark. It was a simple miracle for men used to blackouts and rubble. "We are traveling through a country that never sleeps," Hartmann wrote, "a land so rich it can afford to keep its lights on during war." For years, Nazi propaganda had painted America as a chaotic land of racial decay. Lazy workers, greedy capitalists, weak soldiers. But through the train windows, the Germans saw something else. Black truck drivers, women operating cranes, children walking to school in clean clothes. "We were told they were inferior," Hartmann wrote, "but these people drive cars while our soldiers walk barefoot in Russia." No speech could have destroyed Nazi ideology as efficiently as a window view across America. When the train slowed near Detroit, the sky burned with light. It was Willow Run, the bomber plant, a single building stretching more than a mile. Inside, the assembly lines moved like veins through a living organism. An American guard said, "1 B-24 every hour." The Germans stared in disbelief. They knew how long it took to build one Messerschmitt. 2 weeks. Here it was an hour. "We used whips to make men work," Kurt Miller whispered. "They used wages and faith." That night, no one slept. Even the fanatics were quiet. They had seen the machine that was going to end the Reich. The next stop was Tennessee. At a siding, trains unloaded crates labeled washing machines, radios, bicycles, refrigerators, all civilian goods during wartime. A sergeant laughed bitterly. "We banned toothbrushes to save aluminum, and they make refrigerators." Everywhere they looked, abundance. Automobiles in endless rows, gas stations at every corner. To a German, an automobile was a symbol of privilege. To an American, it was just life. "An American worker lives like a German officer," Hartmann noted, and in that sentence, Nazi ideology quietly died. The train finally stopped in Arkansas. Through the windows, they saw pine forests and fields glowing under the morning sun. Rows of white wooden barracks stretched into the distance. The sign read, "Camp Chaffee, U.S. Army POW, Camp number 826. No dogs, no screaming guards, only barbed wire that gleamed like silver in the light." At processing, a calm American officer spoke through a translator. "You fought bravely. Now your duty is to live with discipline and dignity." They didn't believe him, not at first. But when they received clean uniforms, letters home, and meals with fresh meat, disbelief turned to confusion. The enemy was treating them as men. Summer came early that year. The prisoners worked on nearby farms, hoeing, harvesting, mending fences. The farmer, Henry Morrison, greeted them each morning with a wave and a pot of coffee. He had lost his son in Normandy, yet treated them without hatred. When Hartmann asked why, Morrison said, "I don't feed enemies, I feed workers." Then he pointed to his tractor. "One man with this machine does the work of your whole platoon." It was a John Deere Model A, 30 horsepower, hydraulic lift, and 4 gears. Germany had none like it. "Each of these is 20 horses," Hartmann wrote, "and he owns 4. In that moment, he understood. The war was already decided. During a break, Hartmann asked Morrison about his fields. The farmer laughed. "The government pays us not to plant too much, or prices fall." Hartmann blinked. In Germany, farmers were shot for hiding seed grain. Here, they were paid to produce less. "At home, hunger is law," he wrote. "Here, the problem is too much food." He finally saw the true battlefield of World War II. One side fought for survival, the other fought against overproduction. Later that fall, the prisoners worked on road construction. They watched a single Caterpillar D7 bulldozer push entire hillsides aside. Schneider, the engineer, stared and whispered, "We've lost. We just haven't signed the papers yet." He wasn't talking about war. He was talking about civilization. The bulldozer moved mountains, powered not by ideology, but by diesel and ingenuity. One man and one machine had become more powerful than any regiment shouting Heil Hitler. The camp newspaper printed American production statistics: 29,000 tanks in 1943, 96,000 warplanes in 1944, 17 billion rounds of ammunition. The numbers were meaningless until the prisoners remembered what they'd seen. The cranes, the trains, the tractors, the women in overalls. Then the numbers became terrifyingly real. When a nation can replace everything faster than you can destroy it, Schneider said, the war's already over. By 1944, many prisoners were sent to work in factories, lumber mills, and canning plants. They saw women controlling conveyor belts that processed thousands of cans an hour. An old American lady flipped a switch, and an entire line of machines came alive. "One woman and a button," Schneider muttered. "That is their army." Every day chipped away at what they once believed. The myth of racial superiority, of discipline forged in fear, all crumbled before the quiet precision of democracy in motion. That winter, coal heated every barrack. Christmas packages arrived again. Socks, candy, even letters from American families. One note said simply, "May you find peace when you go home." Berlin was in ruins, yet in Arkansas, prisoners were warm and fed. "The enemy gives us what our homeland cannot," Hartmann wrote, "kindness." For the first time, he felt guilt deeper than defeat. By spring 1944, the ideological divide inside the camp shifted. The fanatics had gone silent. The moderates began reading English newspapers. A few volunteered to teach. Hartmann started leading a small group, explaining American words and customs. He told them, freedom isn't chaos. It's order without fear. And for the first time, no one laughed. June 6, 1944. The radio in the camp announced, Allied forces have landed in Normandy. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men. The prisoners stared at the loudspeaker in silence. They didn't need to see the invasion. They already had, in the assembly lines of Detroit, the tractors of Arkansas, and the quiet faith of ordinary Americans. The war was won. Hartmann wrote, long before the first soldier stepped onto the beach, outside the wire, the Arkansas wind carried the smell of coal and wet pine. Inside Camp Chaffee, life was quiet. Too quiet. The prisoners were warm, well-fed, and safe. But inside their minds, a different war had begun. A war of guilt, disbelief, and awakening. Hartmann wrote, we have everything. Food, heat, even books. And yet none of us can sleep. They were no longer fighting America. They were fighting the ghosts of what they once believed. By early 1944, Camp Chaffee was divided, not by fences, but by faith. The loyal Nazis still saluted the swastika at night. The neutral men just wanted to survive. And a small, silent group, like Hartmann and Schneider, began to question everything. Tension filled the air like a slow-burning fuse. Every conversation could turn dangerous. Every word could be betrayal. I fear my comrades more than my captors, Hartmann confessed. It began one evening in the mess hall. Hartmann remarked that Germany had made a fatal mistake invading Russia. Lieutenant Brandt, a proud SS officer, slammed his tray onto the table and shouted, "Traitor! You dare insult the Führer in front of the enemy?" No one spoke, but for the first time, fear shifted, away from the guards and toward each other. That night, a young soldier was found dead in the warehouse, hanging from a rope. His note said only, I can't live among the blind. The Americans buried him outside the fence with a wooden cross, Ein deutscher Soldat, 1944. The U.S. officers called it the war behind the wire. The Germans had brought their ideology with them, and now it turned inward. Secret committees whispered threats, swastikas drawn in chalk on the barrack walls. But something was changing. The men who worked outside the camp, who saw American farms, factories, and families, stopped joining the nightly rituals. They had seen too much. Schneider said quietly, We are losing the war in our heads. In December 1944, letters began arriving from Germany. Fragile, smoky, full of pain. Hartmann's mother wrote, "The house is gone. Your father died in the Munich raids. There is only snow and hunger." He folded the letter without a word. Around him, men wept over news from Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne. One, Franz Meyer, learned that his wife and child were killed in the bombing. He screamed until his voice broke, then fell silent forever. Hartmann wrote, "Hell is not outside. It's inside when you realize you helped build it." The Americans screened a confiscated film, Triumph of the Will. The Germans gathered to watch. At first, they sat upright, proud. Then the camera panned across the endless sea of salutes, the hysterical faces, the glowing image of Hitler. In the silence of an Arkansas auditorium, it looked different now, like madness. Someone muttered, "We were hypnotized." An SS officer stood up and walked out halfway through. He never returned to the hall. The next morning, the swastika chalk marks vanished from the walls. At an English class one evening, the American instructor asked, "Why do you think Germany lost?" The room was silent. Then Hartmann said softly, "Because we thought we were chosen. But the chosen people are the ones who cooperate, not the ones who conquer." The instructor nodded. Maybe every war needs someone to wake up. The words stayed with them for years. Not everyone woke up. The hardliners grew desperate. They circulated leaflets, painted symbols, called the moderates black-hearted cowards. One night, Schneider was ambushed in the latrine. Broken nose, broken ribs. No one saw anything. The guards found blood on the floor, but no witnesses. "There are no guns here," an American sergeant said, "but there's still a war." After the attack, Colonel Patterson ordered a new screening. Not propaganda this time, but truth. The film was the Nazi plan. Real footage from liberated camps. Skeletal bodies, mass graves, the horror of Auschwitz. Some Germans laughed nervously, calling it lies. Patterson said nothing. He handed them American newspapers with the same photos. The laughter died. Hartmann wrote, "If this is true, then we were not soldiers, we were sinners." That night, he stood outside under the stars and whispered, "Freedom isn't weakness. It's discipline without fear." Lieutenant Brandt, once the loudest believer, now sat alone. When Hartmann visited him, Brandt stared at the floor. "Do you still believe?" Hartmann asked. Brandt hesitated. "I believed in something that gave me purpose. Now I have nothing." Hartmann walked away, writing later, "Hell has no demons. Only men afraid to wake up." May 1945. The camp radio crackled. "Berlin has fallen, Hitler is dead." No cheers, no tears, and only silence. The war was over, but peace felt heavier than war. Hartmann looked out the window, the Arkansas sky clear and blue, and thought, we killed millions chasing an illusion, while paradise stood right here under electric light. Another prisoner whispered, "The war's over, but the guilt has just begun." That summer, the prisoners were allowed to work freely outside the camp. They repaired fences, planted crops, and spoke with American townsfolk. Children waved, old women brought bread. No one cursed them. A 17-year-old girl gave Hartmann a photo, her family smiling before a fireplace. On the back she'd written, "This is what my country fights to protect." He kept that photo for the rest of his life. When the repatriation order came in 1946, many hesitated. They feared returning to ruins, not just the ruins of Germany, but of belief. But they boarded the ships anyway. Hartmann stood on deck as America faded into the mist. He realized he wasn't leaving a prison. He was leaving a lesson. "We came here as prisoners," he wrote, "and we leave as students of freedom." Back in Bavaria, Hartmann found only rubble. Yet he began rebuilding. Not walls, but values. He opened a small workshop, teaching young men how to weld, how to think, how to question. On the wall hung a wooden sign, "Arbeit ohne Angst," work without fear. He had learned that phrase not from ideology, but from experience. In his final entry, Hartmann wrote, "We once believed that power meant making others afraid. Now I know. True power is giving others hope." He closed the journal, placed it beside the photo of the girl by the fire, and smiled faintly. Outside, children laughed in the street. Free, loud, alive. The hell within him was finally quiet. May 8, 1945. The news spread through Camp Chaffee like a whisper. Germany has surrendered. Hitler is dead. There were no cheers, no shouts of victory, only silence. The men stood still, unsure whether to feel relief or shame. For the first time in 6 years, there was nothing left to fight for. Hartmann sat by the window, holding his coffee, watching the smoke rise from the stove. He thought of his father, his burned home, the rubble of Munich. "We believed we were fighting for our homeland," he wrote, "but in truth we were fighting for a lie." A soldier nearby muttered, "It's over, but why does it hurt so much?" Soon the mail arrived. Thin envelopes, scorched at the edges, smelling faintly of ashes. One from Hartmann's mother read, "Berlin is gone. The neighbors are gone. Come home if there is still a home." Others spoke of hunger, disease, and silence. Entire cities turned to dust. The men passed the letters around, as if by sharing the grief they could divide it. For the first time, defeat felt real. It had faces, names, and handwriting. It wasn't the end of a war. It was the beginning of remorse. When repatriation lists were posted, many refused to sign. The thought of returning to a broken nation terrified them. A man named Keller said softly, "Here I have food, warmth, and no one hates me. What waits for me in Germany?" Hartmann understood. He too was afraid. Afraid of the silence, the ruins, the stares of those who had lost everything. "We are going home," he wrote, "but to a place that no longer exists." In June, the local town invited the prisoners to help set up a celebration for the war's end. They built the stage, hung the flags, watched the people gather. When the music started, the Americans didn't chant, "We won." They sang Amazing Grace. No parade, no boasting, only gratitude that the killing had stopped. "The strong do not need to shout," Hartmann wrote. "They simply remain human." Before repatriation began, Colonel Patterson visited the camp one last time. He walked through the barracks without his cap, shaking hands with every prisoner. His voice was calm, even fatherly. War teaches strange lessons. When your enemy stops fearing you and begins respecting you, that's when peace truly begins. No one responded, but when he turned to leave, hundreds of Germans stood and saluted. Not to the Reich, but to a man who had shown them dignity. When the gates opened, each prisoner received civilian clothes, $10, and a small bag of personal belongings. Hartmann carried his diary, a pencil, and a photograph of a smiling American girl before a fireplace. As the trucks rolled out, townspeople lined the road. No stones, no curses, only quiet waves and murmured blessings. One old woman whispered, "May God take you home safe." Hartmann lowered his head. "This," he wrote, "is what victory looks like." September 1946. The ship docked at Bremerhaven. The men stepped ashore into a wasteland. Ruins stretched for miles. Church towers stood hollow, streets cracked and empty. A U.S. officer said quietly, "This is the price of pride." Hartmann walked through what had once been Munich. Children scavenged for coal. Women carried bricks in baskets. No flags, no songs, just silence. A year later, Hartmann opened a small workshop in Bavaria. He taught young apprentices how to weld, how to measure precisely, how to treat each other with respect. Above the workbench hung a wooden sign, "Arbeit ohne Angst," work without fear. He explained to his students, this phrase built America. It can rebuild Germany too. Each morning he turned on the lights early. The glow filled the workshop. The same warm, steady light he remembered from the factories of Detroit. For him, that light was freedom itself. In the 1950s, as Germany rose from the ashes in what economists called Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, many of the men who had once been prisoners became engineers, teachers, and reformers. When American journalists visited, they asked, "How did you rebuild so fast?" Hartmann smiled, "Because we learned from the Americans that machines are powerful only when people are free." The new Germany wasn't built on vengeance, but on humility, by men who had seen both sides of civilization. In 1965, Hartmann returned to America as part of an engineering exchange. He visited the Morrison farm where he once worked as a prisoner. Henry Morrison, now an old man with silver hair, greeted him on the porch. They sat in rocking chairs watching the fields shimmer in the sun. Morrison said, "Back then, I thought I was showing you how strong my country was. But now I see you were the proof that it worked." Hartmann smiled. "No, sir. Your country's strength is that it can teach even its enemies how to be decent men." Years later, Hartmann wrote in a magazine, "Victory isn't the destruction of your enemy. It's when your enemy understands your values." The essay spread through post-war Germany. Factories hung signs quoting his line. Schools taught it to children. The phrase "work without fear" became a quiet anthem for a new generation. In his old age, Hartmann gave one final interview. He spoke slowly, eyes dim but steady. "The Americans didn't defeat us with bombs. They defeated us with dignity. They believed every man deserved respect, even a captive." He paused. "A woman once sent me a knitted scarf and a Christmas card. I never knew her name, but she was the reason I stopped hating." 1987, Munich. Hartmann died in his sleep at the age of 66. On his desk lay his journal, the photo of the American girl, and a folded newspaper from 1945. The last sentence in his handwriting read, "We lost the war, but we found our humanity." At his funeral, his son read those words aloud. "No nation truly wins if humanity is left behind." Today, in a small museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas, there's a letter from Colonel Patterson to Washington, dated 1946. The German prisoners did not just learn how to live in freedom, they learned to believe in it, and maybe, just maybe, they will help prevent the next war. Beneath the letter hangs a faded black and white photo of smiling prisoners standing beneath floodlights. The caption reads, "They came as enemies. They left as men." When people speak of victory in World War II, they mention Normandy, Midway, Berlin. But there was another victory, quieter, invisible, yet eternal. It happened in the hearts of men who discovered that mercy could be stronger than hate. "Freedom isn't weakness," Hartmann once said. "It's the power to forgive when you could destroy." That is how the war truly ended. Not with an explosion, but with understanding. The last battle was fought inside the human soul, and in that battle, humanity finally won.